just for fun here, we're going to set up a little JavaScript project using Es Lint. I've got a project coming up here, a video project that I'm working on, and I need to configure some Es Lint stuff. And it's one of those things you kind of do at the beginning of a project, but then you don't really do it again as you're working with the project and stuff. So you always have to go back and revisit exactly how to set that up. So to do this, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to fire up my terminal window here, and I'm going to create a new project folder here. And let's go there. There we go. And we'll create ourselves a new folder, and we're just going to put JS demo, and then we'll change into JS demo and open up Visual Studio Code. I love Visual Studio Code for writing applications and stuff. Now I've got this currently set in the light theme, and the reason for that is a class I was teaching this week, the projector wasn't very good, and so it couldn't project enough light in order to see it with the darker theme. So we're just going to go ahead and change that real quick back to the darker theme. And we'll just come into here, color theme, and let's go ahead and do this as dark. Cool. So now that we've got that, now let's go ahead. And what we're going to do is kind of set up like an initial project here. What we want to do is add a little bit of JavaScript code to make a little web server. We also want to set up some ESLint stuff so we can be linting our JavaScript code. While I regularly add ESLint rules to things like create React app type applications, doing this from scratch, you have to do a few extra steps to kind of make all this work, and then of course integrate it with VSCode. So let's go ahead and see about trying to set that up. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up the terminal window here in VSCode, and we'll come on into here, and I'm going to create basically a new package JSON file. So we've got our npm command here. If you've ever used Node.js before, just go to nodejs.org and you can download the latest version of Node. I think I'm running here right now version 12. There we go. So so now we have a package JSON file. What we can do is we can use this file to wire up a start script to actually run our application. But in addition to that, I also can put my ESLinting rules inside of this file. I used to put them in external files, but I kind of found that I got tired of all these extra little configuration files in my projects, and I don't have that many rules that I follow. So putting them right here in package.json is really a good way to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is create a little JavaScript file here. It'll be our little application. We'll just say index.js there. And our ESLint library is not loading, but we'll take care of that in a second. Come into here, we're going to create a little web application. What we want to do is just set it up so that if you visit a little web page, it'll actually return back an index file. You could use a tool like Serve or even Parcel.js to be able to do that, but we're just going to write our own little simple hello world type version. This is like the most classic Node application people ever create. So we'll simply come in and say const http equal to require http. We're also going to read a file off the file system, so I'll just come in and say fs and bring in the file system module. Awesome. So now what we're going to do is we're going to just create a little web server. So we'll say const http server equal to, and we'll say http.create server. Now under this create server, you're going to be passing basically a handler file, something called middleware. And we're just going to set this up with an arrow function. I tend to prefer arrow functions over a keyword style. I know that a lot of people in the JavaScript community seem to really love their keyword style functions, but I really only like to use those when I'm doing something that is intentionally using prototype inheritance or a prototype chain. So now we've got our request and our response. We're really just going to wire this thing up to actually just read a single index.html file. And we're going to set up that actual file here inside of a www folder. So we've got our www, we'll say new file, and we're going to say index.html. Perfect. At the top of this file, we'll just simply do doctype HTML. We'll throw a little HTML tag here at the top, although technically HTML head and body and all of those are actually optional, but it's a best practice to include them. We'll just say hello world. There we go. Body, and we'll just come into here, do a little H1 awesomeness, and say hello world. So now we've got ourselves a little web page. So we can serve this up from our index.js file that we're going to create here. So what I want to do here is basically any request that we get to the server, we're just going to have it serve up index.html. So we'll just come into here and we're going to do our fs.read file. And then we'll come into here and we'll just have it read from the www/index.html file. We're using the callback approach to this, so we'll have our error object, but we'll also have the actual data from the file. Now, unless we want to have to convert this buffer to the right encoding, it's probably a best practice to go ahead and include the UTF-8 right there, so we'll get that as actual UTF data. We don't have to worry about doing like a buffer2 string or something like that on it. So now we can come into here and we can say res.end, not RMF, but end. And then we can pass into that our actual content here. So we'll just say data. Now, we probably should do some type of actual setting of a status or something like that. Res status. Let's see here. Let's see. I want to do send head. Oh, what is that? Write head. That's what I'm looking for. So write head. And we'll just go ahead and give this a status of 200 coming back like that. Now, of course, we probably should set it up that if we have some type of error that occurs reading the file, so we have if error, let's go ahead and output that error there to the console. If you like using something like Winston or whatever to record your errors, you can use that too. And then here we'll go ahead and we'll say res.writeHead, and we'll just make that a 500. Why not? It's kind of hard to make a bad request since we're not really paying attention to the request, so we'll just go with this straight up 500 error. And then we'll do a res.end. Okay, cool. So we've got the beginnings here of a web server. Since at the moment we're not really using the request object, it's probably better to kind of make that just be an underscore. That way it's more clear that we're not going to be using that parameter at all. All right, cool. Now that we've got this HTTP server object ready to go, now we need to actually tell it to listen on a particular port. What we could do here if we want is we can actually put like a configuration inside of our package.json file with our port number and then be able to pull the port number out that way, or we could just hard code it. Let's just hard code it for right now. We can expand this out later if we decide we want to do more with it. So we'll come into here and say HTTP server.listen. And then we're going to just tell it to listen on port 3000. That's kind of the classic one. We'll throw in an object or a function, callback function in here to check for errors if we have one. And we'll just say if error console.log error. And then just put return. And then finally down here, we can do a console.log HTTP server running on port, and we can do 3000. There we go. Okay, now the only downside to what we have going on here is that we are in fact going to get a request from the browser for the favicon. And this, of course, will send back the HTML file again. It won't send an actual favicon back. It won't cause the page to break, but if you are looking at the network tab in your web browser, most likely you'll see an error where it tries to reach back out to the favicon. But that's okay. We'll just roll with this for now. Come back over here to package.json. We can update the script section, and we'll just make this our start script here. And we'll say node, and then we'll do index.html. Looks good. So now we'll come into here and let's go ahead and run this thing. So we'll say npm start. Notice when you do the start here, you don't have to include run. If you do it the test or start script, you can omit the run part of the command from the command prompt. But if you're running any other script, make sure you include npm run and then the name of the script entry. Hit enter. Looks like we had ourselves an error. So let's see here. Not node index HTML. We want to run node index.js. All right. And let's click back down here and run that. Hey, we got a web server running on port 3000. So let's go ahead and open up Chrome, kind of the de facto standard web browser for all web developers out there. Localhost 3000. Let's see if we get our hello world. There we go. We have a hello world page. Cool. So now that we've got this simple little running application, what we really want to do is set up the linting for this. So be able to have a linter configured so that we can actually have some good linting in our source code. Like for example, taking a look at this file here, let's see what column this is. This is column 60. That's kind of the longest line that we have. But if you have really long lines and stuff like that, it's good to have a linter to kind of rein you in and say, hey, keep this down to 80 characters wide or 100 characters, so on and so forth. Also, it's good policy to enforce things like semicolons. I like to do a new line at the end of the file, so here we don't have a new line. So the question is, how would we actually go about setting all of this up? So what we're going to do is we're going to pull in something called Es Lint. And Es Lint will nicely integrate with most editing environments to actually provide decorations inside of the editor and then be able to get these various linting rules applied. Now, because this is something that we do, like at the beginning of a project, not something that we do every single day, this is not one of these things that we have memorized. So when I create React applications or Angular, much of my coding is from memory because we're working with that day in and day out. But setting up initial tooling like linters and stuff like that, it doesn't really work like that. So the way to get started with this is actually just to come over to Google and search on Es Lint. We'll click on the ESLint.org website here, and we'll go ahead and get started. So here's all the different sponsors and stuff. Look at that. All right, so come into here to the user guide. We'll click on Getting Started. And it'll show us what we need to install. Now, you can install Es Lint globally on your system. I don't really recommend that. I recommend installing it for a particular project. And that's actually what you're going to see here for the instructions. So let's just grab the first line here. We'll just say npm install Es Lint. We'll just copy that, come back over to our editor. I'm going to paste that in there, but I'm going to do something a little bit different. I like to say -d, which is the --save dev, but I also like to say -e. I like to install the exact version. I don't like the tildes and the carets and all that showing up in my package.json files. I've just been burnt enough times with things being updated or upgraded that I didn't really want to be updated or upgraded. So we'll go ahead and hit enter here. And that's going to go ahead and install that. While that's installing, we'll flip back over to here. You can actually run a configuration file. Now, to do this Es Lint is going to create a new file here, actually in your folder called ESLint.rc. We'll do that first, and then we'll move it over to package.json. Now, you can run Es Lint going to the .bin folder if you want to. But you can also use another convenient command called npx. It's also distributed with npm. And npx allows you to run these command line tools from the command prompt without having to specify that long folder path. So we'll come over to here, and we're going to say npx ESLint init. So we'll run that, and we should see, here we go. It's going to ask us some questions first. And let's see here. To check syntax and find problems, check syntax, find problems, and enforce code style. So we'll go ahead and select that last one. That one sounds good. Type of modules. Do we want to use like ES 2015 modules, CommonJS? Well, in this particular application, we're actually using CommonJS with our Node file. But if we were writing, maybe like a React application using Webpack and we were actually using ES 2015 modules, we'd select that one. But I'm going to go with CommonJS for right now. We're not using React or Vue. If you were using those, you could actually get some default rules, which is awesome. That's particularly useful when you're doing things like JSX with React. But we're going to say none of these. And we're not going to use TypeScript. If you are using TypeScript, I recommend another tool called Es Lint. I don't think I've ever really tried to use Es Lint with TypeScript, but maybe they have support for that now. So we'll go ahead, hit enter there. Where does our code run? In this case, we're going to be running it in Node and the browser. And that's because we're going to be having our Node application, which is the web server, but we'll also be having some code in our web page for our JavaScript content. Let's see here. I'm going to answer, let's see, we'll just use a popular style guide and just go with it from there. And then we can make modifications to it. You know, there's so many different style guides and stuff, and everybody has an opinion on what's the best way to set up their JavaScript code. Recently, I've been seeing in a lot of places I teach at, people are really trying to avoid the semicolons. And I actually had a student who did not use semicolons and actually wrote code that looked like it should work, but it didn't. And that's because JavaScript actually adds the semicolons in there for you when it actually goes to run it. So you have to make sure that you're really clear about where those semicolons are being placed. So we'll go ahead and do that. And what format do you want your file? We'll actually go for a file in a JSON format here. Great. Would you like to install these additional plugins? We'll go ahead and say yes, and it'll pull those plugins for us. We'll give it a second to update. Excellent. So now we've got all of those there. Okay. So now, in your editor, you'll want to make sure, so I'm using VSCode. If you're using a different editor, that's totally fine, but I'm not going to do instructions for other editors. I'm going to do the one for the editor that I use. I'm going to go and take a look at the extensions I have installed here. And you'll see there's Es Lint. I believe Es Lint is installed by default in all instances of VSCode. And so this Es Lint extension will be used to basically put the support within the editor for verifying that we're following the rules and stuff. If we go to problems here, take a look. It's got all the little linting rules are now showing up. So let's see what it's complaining about here. I'm probably going to disagree with the rule. Yes, unnecessary semicolons. I do not agree with that. I do believe in the use of semicolons. So we're going to have to modify this configuration some. So we have our Es Lint JSON thing here, and what we want to do is add some additional rules for making this work the way that I want it to. So now we get to come in and search through the rules. So let's see here. You can take a look at the rules here, and it'll show you all the different rules, and you can see there's lots and lots and lots of things that you can configure. Lots of good stuff there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come into here and I'm going to search on semicolons, if I could spell it right. Semicolon. Cool. So here's the semicolon rule. All right. And this is the no extra, which is actually not what I want. I want to require semicolons. Scroll on down here. There we go. Semi-error always. That's my preference. So we'll come into here. Let's add the rule. Now, because we're putting this into JSON, you got to make sure you wrap that key like that. So we'll go ahead and save. Take a look. All those errors went away because now you have to have semicolons. Block must not be padded by blank lines. Oh, it doesn't like the fact that I've got a blank line in there. Yeah, I disagree with that. I like having blank lines sometimes. So what we're going to do is we're going to find this rule, padded blocks, and we're going to say padded blocks. There we go. And let's click on that rule. And we're going to say padded blocks. Let's see here. I like single. No, that's for single line blocks. I want, let's see. Requires empty lines. I don't want to require. Never. I want to say that I don't care. Let's see here. Can I make it optional? It's basically I always have to allow it or I never want to allow it. Well, generally I always include them. So let's just copy this over right now. And let's just pop that in there. I may want to revisit that rule again. One of the things you'll find is that sometimes you'll quickly find rules that will line up exactly with what you're looking for, and then other times it's like you get close but not exactly what you want. Okay, so padded blocks, errors must be padded by blank lines. So now I'm going to get errors for all the places I'm not padding them with blank lines. All right, trailing spaces, not allowed. That's fine. I don't like trailing spaces. And my editor's putting that there. All right. And what's this one complaining about? New line at the end. I do like that one. And I guess it's that padded block thing again. Trailing spaces, that'll go away in a second. And then the block must be padded by blank lines. Oh, so then now I'm enforcing this to have the block. Gotcha. So now I've got it set up to have these blank lines. But you can see now we've got this set up where we can start to have some linting here built directly into the editor. Now, what I don't want to do is I don't want to have an ESLint JSON file. Nothing technically wrong with it, but I'd rather put it in my package JSON just to reduce the number of files I have to contend with. So let's go to the user guide here and let's see configuring ESLint. Let's see if we can find a package JSON. Here it is, ESLint entry. So let's do an ESLint config entry. And let's put that right here in package JSON. And let's drop that in like that. That looks good. And then do I want it all the way up there? I don't think so. You know what? I think I'd rather move that down. I'd rather put the more important things kind of at the top. And let's put a comma there, get rid of comma there. Now, what I want to do is come over to the ESLint RC JSON file, and I'm literally just going to copy all of this. Copy. And then I'm going to pop into here, well, into package JSON. And then I'm going to drop it in there like that. That looks good. So now we'll fix our indenting. Great. Which means I can now get rid of this file. Let's delete that. Okay. So now let's see if we can break a rule and make sure that it's in fact reading the package JSON file and we're getting some good linting. There we go. Awesome. So now we've got our linter set up. Now, one last one I want to put in here real quick is I do like to have like a max line length. So I didn't used to enforce this actually. I started doing some Python though, and in the Python rules, so Python's all about what the community does as opposed to individuals. And one of the standard things, I believe it's PEP 8 or something like that with Python, is limiting the line length to like 79 or 80 characters. And I thought that was kind of silly, to be honest with you, with today's modern widescreen monitors. But I found that when I actually started enforcing this rule, particularly with my JavaScript code, I wrote better JavaScript code. And it also allowed me to be able to show two files next to each other much more easily, even with a widescreen monitor. So I could put 2 or 3 files right next to each other, which can be really helpful, for example, when working with things like React and you're having to kind of trace the whole passing of props through 2 or 3 components. It can be nice to have them kind of right next to each other. So we'll go ahead and add that here to our configuration. We'll go to package JSON. We're going to jump into our rules here. We'll add another rule down there. Now, at the moment, we're not really violating this rule, so we're not going to be solving any problems by putting it there. But that way later on, especially if we start nesting functions too deeply, that's really where I find this max length thing to come in handy, is if you start nesting your functions too deeply, maybe you need to kind of pull that out and kind of restructure the code a little bit. that can be really helpful there. So the only thing I've really got going on here that I don't really like in terms of my configuration so far is I don't like the fact that I have to put this here. Like I want to have the option of including it or not including it. So I think what I may do is down here, you see where it says extend standard. I think I'm just going to yank that out. And I bet if I take that out, maybe that'll make my block situation go away. And I'll take that out there. Yeah, there we go. So now because I'm not extending the standard, that goes away. So if you want to use one of the existing style guides, you can. I don't typically do that though, unless it's like for React. I typically just will start off blank, but the little wizard tool didn't give me that option. So now I've given myself that option. So we'll come into index. Let's just validate everything's still working. Good, missing semicolon. So now as I go through and do my coding, I'll just go through as I come across things and just set it to what I want it to be. So for example, tab width here is set to 4, but I don't really want it set to 4. I like to set it to 2. So let's come back over here and we'll just tack that on to the end and say tab width 2. That'll work. And there we go. So now we've got ourselves a little web application serving up an HTML file. We've got some ES linting configured for our project. We kind of started with nothing and kind of put all this together. So you can see incorporating things like ESLint is really easy into your projects. And you definitely don't want to memorize all the details to doing that. But you can see it's real easy to follow their setup instructions and then include the rules that you want to include for the things that you're working on. All right, so that kind of concludes our live session here for this evening. I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend. And for those of you who were able to join us, it was great to have you. Have a great one. Bye.